So continuing on the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, I'm on page 32. The violation of my trust respecting Vernon's money was one of the first great errata of my life. And then he says his father wasn't so far off in saying, you're not really old enough to open your own business yet. You need a few more years. So he says my father wasn't too far off, but Sir William disagreed and says discretion doesn't always accompany years. Quote, "Since he will not set you up, I will do it myself. Give me an inventory of the things necessary to be had from England, and I will send for them. You shall repay me when you are able." This was spoken with such an appearance of cordiality that I had not the least doubt of him meaning what he said. I afterward heard it as his known character to be liberal of promises, which he never meant to keep. Nevertheless, I presented him an inventory. He liked it, but he asked if my being on the spot in England to choose the types and see that everything was good might not be to some advantage. And I agreed that this might be advantageous. Then, he said, get yourself ready to go by the Annis, which was the annual ship between Philadelphia and London. But it would be some months before the Annis sailed, so in the meantime, he continued working with Chimere and fretting extremely about the money Collins had got from him. Now, he interstices here. He says, I believe I omitted mentioning, in my first voyage from Boston to Philadelphia, our crew employed themselves in catching cod and hauled up a great number. And then I had stuck to my resolution to eat nothing that had had life. You remember, he's a vegetarian. Because he believes killing anything is like murder. So any animal he refused to eat. But upon taking all these cod and opening some of them and cooking them there and preparing them, he saw that a lot of them had babies inside of them and had eaten other fish. And he reasoned on it. He said, if they themselves eat each other, how am I so worse off to eat one of them? So then he says, so convenient a thing it is to be a reasonable creature, since it enables one to find or make a reason for everything one has a mind to do. Now it talks about how he used to sort of mess around with his boss, Chimere, playing with the Socratic method, he says, and had trepanned him so often by questions apparently so distant from any point that we had in hand, yet by degrees leading to the point and bringing him into difficulties and contradictions, that at last he grew ridiculously cautious. And he would hardly answer me the most common question without first asking, what do you intend to infer from that? I think that's funny. He grew ridiculously cautious. However, it gave him so high an opinion of my abilities in a confuting way that he seriously proposed my being his colleague in a project he had of setting up a new sect, a religion. He was to preach the doctrine, and I was to confound all opponents. When he came to explain with me upon the doctrines, I found several conundrums, which I objected to, unless I might have my way a little too, and introduce some of mine. And then he just drops that and goes on from there. They never started their religious sect, I guess, but they had thought of it. And Benjamin Franklin would confound all, confound all opponents. Now he talks about how poetry improves one's language, but doesn't do too much else for you. It helps you with words and use of words and stuff, but that's about it. I don't know what else you would want from it. On this, it was proposed that he and a couple of his friends, Ralph and Osborne, should each of us at our next meeting produce a piece of our own composing. They would each write a piece, a version of the 18th Psalm, which describes the descent of a deity. Now, when the time of the meeting came close, it turned out that Ben hadn't had time to do anything, but Ralph had a piece. And Ralph says to Ben, now look, Osborne despised me, Osborne hates me. Would you give your piece as mine? Here, take my piece, and you hand it as yours, and we'll just say I didn't have time to do anything, and then we'll get an honest reply from Osborne. Instead of just criticizing me, he'll think it's your piece, and maybe he'll speak to it a little better. So we shall, as we say to do it, and immediately Ben took to scribble down in his own hand from Ralph's piece, and they met. Now the first thing they do, Watson, who we hadn't mentioned, so there's Watson, Ralph, and Osborne. Watson's performance was read, and there were some beauties in it, but many defects. Then Osborne's was read. He's the really critical guy, and it was much better. Ralph did it justice, remarked some faults, but applauded the beauties. So Ralph was, generous towards Osborne. He himself had nothing to produce. I was backward and seemed desirous of being excused, and had not had sufficient time to correct it, etc. But no excuse could be admitted. So produce I must. It was read and repeated. So Ben didn't want to present himself as the one who had written this, really. But no excuse could be admitted. Watson and Osborne gave up the contest and joined in applauding it, in applauding Ben's piece. Ralph only made some criticisms and proposed some amendments. It was Ralph's piece, right? But I defended my text. Osborne was severe against Ralph, and told me he was no better able to criticize than compose verses. So he's like, Ralph, you can't even criticize Ben's piece, let alone compose something as good as it. He doesn't know Ralph's the one who wrote it. As these two were returning home, Osborne expressed himself still more strongly in favor of what he thought my production, having before refrained, as he said, lest he should think he meant to flatter me. But who would have imagined, said he, that Franklin was capable of such a performance, such painting, such force, such fire? And so he waxes romantic about Ben's fantastic piece. And then Ralph let him know the trick on him, and Osborne was laughed at all around. Ralph continued scribbling verses until Alexander Pope cured him of it. Ben tried to dissuade him and tell him, get on with something, but he continued doing that till he was dissuaded by Alexander Pope's abilities. The governor, back to the governor who had promised to buy the printing press and get Ben set up, the governor, seeming to like my company, had me frequently at his house, and his setting me up was always mentioned as a fixed theme. Now he was supposed to take letters and stuff to the governor, and the governor was going to have him put up in whole digested letters of recommendation and stuff to be sent over to England to help Ben in getting the stuff he needed. And the ship was going to sail, came sooner and sooner and sooner. And finally he calls on the governor to receive the letters and take them with him. And the governor's secretary, Dr. Baird, comes out and says the governor is extremely busy writing right now, and he'll be down at Newcastle before the ship takes off, and the letters will be delivered to you there. So Ben says, all right, that's fine. And it turns out the governor was there down by the port when the ship was ready there. But when I went to his lodging, his secretary came to me from him with the expression of the greatest regret that he could not then see me, being engaged in business of the utmost importance, but that he would send the letters to me on board, wishing me heartily a good voyage and a speedy return, etc. I returned on board a little puzzled, but still not doubting. On to chapter 3. Understanding that Colonel French had brought on board the governor's dispatches, I asked the captain for those letters that were to be under my care. He said all were put into the bag together, and he couldn't come at them then, but before we get to England I'll get them for you, for sure. When we came into the Channel, the captain kept his word with me and gave me an opportunity of examining the bag for the governor's letters. I found some upon which my name was put as under my care. I picked out 6 or 7 that by the handwriting I thought might be the